So one of the questions I get asked a lot is, how do you retrieve your cutter? How do you get back your cutter after you've lost it? For example, if we were to press D and switch over to box and we were to perform just a simple box cut, we see that the shape just disappears. However, if we were to Shift A, bring in a cube, and scale it to fit, and select both of them and press Q and choose difference, we see that the shape is still there for now because the cutter collection is still enabled. But if we were to press 1 to just get to our main collection, disable the cutter collection, we see that it's gone. And so a popular question is, how do I retrieve my cutter? So the first thought that comes to mind is using the scroll system, which if you have an object like so that has what we call pending booleans, which are booleans that are not applied, you should press Q and there will be an option there called Everscroll, and just clicking it by default will allow you to begin scrolling through your booleans, and you can just click and just choose the boolean that you want. Another way you can retrieve your booleans is through the hops button drop down, which we intend to be there for anything to assist new users, but you can go here, enable boolean, and you can actually choose to enable and disable collections, and there will even be a nice little wire display. Clicking the operation button will actually change what operation is being performed. If we want to turn this into a union or a difference or a slice, we can just on the fly by clicking these buttons. And through this, you can even change the algorithm that's being used depending on your version of Blender. So right now we're using the fast system since it's the fastest, but if you use exact, it'll definitely take a very large speed hit, even if it's not the active modifier being adjusted. Just having it present can sometimes cause quite a bit of a performance loss, so do use it with caution. But this is just another way you can get back your booleans on the fly if you're needing to retrieve your bool shape. Another way that you can do it, and one of my favorites, is just pressing Alt W and switching over to what we call a hops tool. And in hops tool, you can just hold Control and some dots will appear, and just hovering over these dots will show the shape, and then clicking will bring the shape back. And this is probably one of our more interactive ways to bring back your cutters. But for those who are just sticking with the Q menu regimen, you can just press Q, go in every scroll, and just begin scrolling and bring back your cutters just on the fly without any further issues. One of the more interesting areas of HardOps is the hops button, where you can have quick access to all sorts of interesting options if you're a beginner, but the star here represents the opt-ins area, where clicking on the opt-ins will bring you to basically the controversial options area of HardOps. And if you're following an older tutorial, you may want to change it from every to classic. And for the purpose of this example, I'll just show the classic system, which is what we're referring to the old system as. And if we press Q, we see an option here for mod scroll toggle. And this was always a mouthful to say. And so basically clicking it would activate something called bool scroll, which is actually its own type of scroll. And then if you press Q, you could hover over it, see the tooltip, and you can see that shift clicking will take you into modifier scroll, where you can actually scroll through the modifiers. In the very end, we added the ability for it to show the wires of the modifiers that are being added, not as a object visibility selection, but more as a kind of visual flair to just let you know what's cutting in and creating what. And I was quite proud of this. My favorite things is if we look at the help, there's control left mouse button, which will apply to visible mods. So you can basically scroll to an area and hold control and click, and it will actually apply those modifiers. So if we undo, we crash Blender devastatingly, so it's over there. But let's just go ahead and open that again, because that's just part of life. That's what happens when you apply a ton of modifiers and then you undo it very fast. However, I've been warned that there are some issues going on in the latest version of 2.92 that probably make it not the best idea for me to be demonstrating it. But continuing on, so we are going to go back to our opt-ins, and we're going to change this to classic, and we'll press Q, and just shift clicking this, we can just scroll through, and you can see that I have quite a few modifiers on here. Another interesting thing that I liked about this is that you could scroll to a point and you could shift click in order to apply a duplicated version. And this would be a duplicated version, and the original version would be reverted to its maximum modified version. And so we could just take these two pieces, press I, inset it, press Control I, invert it, and now we just have this piece that we can just solidify and cut into the mesh. And you know, getting a piece like this for something that we intend to get non-destructive is something that normally isn't very easy. So having this kind of derived mesh workflow where you can derive a mesh and then employ it later to create a cut similar to this and then still have the power of sorting to cut it to the other side, there's definitely a lot of magic to be had inside of the classic mod bool scroll toggle. However, let's move on and begin now talking about Everscroll. So now we are back, and let's take a moment to press Q and hover over Everscroll. And by hovering over it, we can see the tooltip where left click will bring up booleans, shift clicking it will bring up modifiers, control clicking it will bring up child objects, and alt clicking it will smart apply. So let's take a moment and just left click it, and we bring up the Boolean mode, and everything seems the same as your traditional bool scroll, and that is the goal. We wanted everything to feel exactly the same, so that way there would be no reason for anyone to ever have to revert back to the previous one. However, the verbiage of the classic version and the way that it worked on a technical level was just becoming difficult to maintain and was beginning to experience some bugs that was just a little difficult for us to continue justifying dealing with, especially as better systems were coming out over time. It just became apparent that it was worthy of rewriting. So here we are looking at the rewrite, and you see that there's really not a whole lot going on with it. You're still just rolling your mouse and scrolling through it. There's still a list showing you exactly which boolean you're doing. There's still a wire overlay. However, if we press tab, we jump into an expanded mode. And of course, with expanded, there's handles where we can click and drag these handles in order to place our modifier stack where we want. And we can continue, of course, scrolling through the stack as we could before. And there's a lot that you can do with this that you couldn't before. In fact, all of the help items are clickable. So for example, if I were to click on control left mouse button here, it would go ahead and apply visible mods similar to what you expect in the previous one. But even more interestingly is you can actually scroll over the top of the expanded UI and it will change through the various settings. However, there's also hotkeys for that. So let's go ahead and right click and back up. So we press Q and we jump into Everscroll again. So right now we're in something called the fast UI, which means there's no interactivity to it. It's just visual objects placed on screen optimized for speed. We don't want any sort of visual hang here or anything to choke up the system. We want you to get in, do your operation, and get out. However, if you press Shift Tab, you can actually jump the type. So now we're in Modifier scroll. So this was something you couldn't do previously. You weren't able to just Shift Tab in order to just jump over into Modifier scroll as you see me doing here. I can Shift Tab again, and now I'm in something called Children scroll, where I'm actually scrolling through the children of this object, and I'm able to see what's there. And really, it's quite handy whenever you're dealing with a hierarchy of objects. For example, if you're dealing with a character, sometimes you want to actually grab things specifically by the child. You know, don't grab me, FBI. But we press Shift Tab and we're back over to bool scroll, back in a familiar bool scroll that we all know and love. And as always, you can just press Tab to just jump into this expanded mode. So we look at this and we see that there's additional options here. There's an option for us to turn the mod off and on. There's an option for us to just flat out apply the mod. And there's even an option here for us to add it to visibility. So you can go in and actually click on a name to see what Boolean it is and choose to click and add it to the visibility of what's going to be left behind on this visible layer that we're looking at whenever you're done with the operation. So we're just going through, clicking and picking and choosing what we want and just adding it to visibility. And this is something you can do in the fast mode as well. However, it's a lot more intuitive whenever you're in this screen. In fact, at this point, we could either add it to visibility by clicking the button, or we could just click to apply this particular operation that we're doing, and it will just give us this as our active selection, with the rest of them all being in the background. But it allows us to quickly jump to this object, do what needs to be done, and then jump to the rest of it. So that's really a kind of quick overview of what Everscroll is, just in a nutshell, and how you can get started with it. So by default, whenever you first begin using Everscroll, you will just click it and it will jump into fast mode, FAS by the way, and you can press tab to jump into expanded mode. However, there is an alternative way to jump into expanded mode every time if you want to use it in that particular state. Let's press Control K, which will bring up the hops preferences, and we'll jump over to properties where we have options for the scroll, and under scroll type, we can choose our scroll UI to come up as expanded under here. And if you want to save that as your default, you can use in the 3 lines at the bottom. and we'll just go ahead and do that. And now at this point, if we jump into Everscroll, we still have that same behavior, but we have this fully clickable dynamic UI up on screen, which normally I don't need this because I'm so used to using the hotkeys. After all, I am the one who requested everything that's in it, but I can just scroll through, use it as I need, particularly find the Boolean that I need, scale it out, select the object, go back in, and just, you know, continue on with the work that needs to be done with performing adjustments and getting this object to be absolutely perfect. But just being able to choose between fast and expanded was something that we want to add to this as well, just because there's so much more that can be done to this than meets the eye. So I'll be going over it more and more in depth as this video continues. However, I just wanted to show just a quick section talking about how you can set your Everscroll to load up in expanded mode or in the fast mode, depending on the way that you feel like working with it. So for this example, we'll just set up a simple shape. So I'm going to delete the cube, Shift A, add a cylinder, and we'll just scale that down. In fact, let's Shift A, add the cylinder again, and instead of letting it have 32, we're going to give it like 16, just so it comes out a little bumpy. And we'll Shift D, duplicate here, S Shift Z to scale it down on every axis, but the Z keeping these to have the exact same depth. We'll select both of them and just go under Q, Operations, and to Shape, and press spacebar, and we'll just change this over to be convex. I've been playing a lot with convex lately, and let's just click to apply that, and we'll Shift H to get rid of this. And so let's press Q and sharpen it, and so everything looks all right, you know. However, it's a little faceted due to issues with the geometry, but let's just ignore that. Let's actually bring back one of our cylinders, not that cylinder. We'll bring back that one, and we're just going to use active only, so that way we can use this center point to just cut into this first shape, and we'll just hide this cylinder. We don't need it because it's obscuring our cut. And we see that we now have a situation where we have a cut in our shape, but we have a shape that just doesn't have the right resolution. And so for this reason, we added a feature a while back called First Subdivision, where you could add a subdivision to the top of the stack. And so before I show how you could use it correctly, I want to show how you're more than likely going to use it incorrectly. So that means you're going to alt click it, and it's just going to work out because I accidentally forgot to sharpen it. Here we go. So normally if you don't have anything marked as sharp, it's not going to work out for you. So just running a sharpen, and we'll be able to get this looking good. And so now we have a subdivision modifier at the start of the stack, and then we have a Boolean. So our shape is shaping up now instead of looking a little inadequate compared to before. All right, so continuing, we'll just keep working this area, just cutting in some details, you know, nothing major. Shift that to live. That's just too bad of an angle to let that live. And then we'll, you know, cut a little narrow pieces in here. And you know what? This area actually kind of worked out for us, didn't it? So let's just take the whole area and cut it in over in this area. And you know, we could actually repeat that in multiple areas. So let's Everscroll, bring that back, and I'm just going to go under Mesh Tools and Control click Radial Array to rotate around the radial, the 3D cursor area. And I don't want it to go around all the way like it is, so I'll press R to lower the radius to something like 180. We'll just place a couple of these in there, and you know, this is what we're looking at so far, right? And let's say that we actually wanted to apply some of these modifiers. So let's go into Everscroll, and we're already in Modifier Scroll and in expanded off the bat because we specified that in our preferences. And one of the good things is that whenever you start Modifier Scroll, it doesn't actually turn all the modifiers off until you scroll it once, and then all the modifiers get turned off, and then you can begin progressively scrolling back to bring back all your modifiers. However, sometimes you want to apply a particular modifier like you see me doing here. Like for example, if I went ahead and just applied this modifier, it's more likely going to be massacred alive by the subdivision at the very top. So just to show that in action, let's go ahead and just click it, and it looks like it worked out. Let's click that one, and we can actually see the Booleans being eaten alive by the subdivision modifier as we're clicking these apply buttons out of order. And so this is something that I foresaw users running into as an issue. And so let's talk about that situation again. We're already in just scroll, so let's just roll the wheel to just jump over to modifier. And let's say we actually want to apply this modifier. Instead of clicking the check, you can shift click it and it will apply to that point. So now we actually have only these modifiers remaining. And then by clicking, we've applied it. And basically this is now our shape. But just letting you know that there's apply to capabilities added inside of ModScroll, and it's just something that I've wanted for a while. You know, we have so many different apply systems inside of HardOps, ranging from Smart Apply to C Sharpen, which is one of our first solutions for applying back in the day, but isn't used so much now in lieu of the rise of Smart Apply. And now I'm letting you know that Everscroll is capable of applying things even better. So let's press X and delete this. Press Alt W, jump over to Hops Tool, and we'll bring up Hops Tool, which, as you know, you bring in one of these boxes. They have a plethora of modifiers because that was the goal. We were trying to create these complex modifier objects to just kind of have fun with it. And we already have our extraction on the clipboard, so why not just use it again? And we'll just look at this from top view, draw an N-gon, backspace because that line was off. And let's try that again. And we can just bring this down. And this is what we're looking at so far, right? And if we just shift click to just jump into our modifiers, we can begin scrolling up what our modifiers are that comprise this object. And you can see that it starts off as a point that is then extruded, and then extruded again to become a plane, and then is mirrored, and then is decimated to remove the point in the middle. If we press Z, we can actually turn on wireframe, and you can see how at this point it was being mirrored over, and then it gets decimated, which makes it into nothing, allowing us to bevel all the points, weld any points that are not supposed to be there, solidify it, bevel it, weld those points that aren't supposed to be there, and then we're performing our booleans, and then we're putting a bevel on top along with our weighted normal. However, if we wanted to apply these booleans, let me just tell you that because this object was built out of a point in space, there is no size to it, there's nothing to it, it's just a point at this point, even with all these modifiers on it. So in order to properly apply any of these, we would need to shift click to apply up to a point. And then from here, we can actually, you know, click and apply one of these, and we can scroll through what's left. However, for some reason, not letting me. Let's try it again. Actually, I was pressing the wrong button there. I don't know what's going on with me today. I am off. But here we are, just scrolling through the last remaining modifier. So the apply to capabilities are there to assist you with getting the most out of just jumping through these modifiers and getting them applied very quickly to help you get on your way quicker, because there's no reason to hang on to the past forever, especially when it becomes at the point that it begins slowing down performance on your computer. Even me, I'm using an i9 and I reached the limits with it, and with the Threadripper it literally had no limits that were able to be reached because it died at the starting line. But whenever it comes to applying things, is definitely an important part of life. You know, people come into Blender thinking that you're able to just keep modifiers alive forever because they don't have any idea about the history of performance that Blender struggled with, and just think that everything's just peachy when really there's such limits that you must take into consideration, and that our tools are aimed to help you, you know, get the most out of that. And if we look at this, we see that the sort is just completely out of control here. Weighted normal is supposed to be at the end. Interesting thing about weighted normal is if you have a weighted normal present, you just click it, it will just resort your modifier, placing weighted normal where it's supposed to go. So that's just one of the benefits of HardOps in the sort system, is that it's pretty integral and built into everything. But continuing on, now that we have our modifier stack making sense again, let's press Q and shift click Everscroll, and we can begin scrolling through our modifiers, and we see that we're able to just scroll through and see our new stack of modifiers completely different than the ones that we dealt with before, but we're still building a nice humble little stack as we continue working on our piece here. Alright, so what I'm going to do is take this hops tool and just delete it, and we'll jump over and just bring in another shape, and we're going to just press Alt W, jump over to box cutter, and just begin cutting immediately, and just put a couple of cuts in here. You know, we can press W, play with Wedge. We see that our bevel's not catching right there, so we can just hold Alt and scroll it back until it does catch. We'll continue cutting in here. Of course, weld is still on, so pressing W a couple of times will cut Wedge right off, so you can get back to work making your unwedged cuts. However, sometimes you just gotta just keep on cutting those wedges once you get started, just detailing everywhere with them. But I like how you can press W and just press W during the draw now in order to change it from wedge to box even before you begin the extrusion process. So in the event you're drawing under wedge and you just want to turn it back to box, you can do that even before. So we're just drawing this shape, just getting started. And so here we are, we have our box, a lot of modifiers. So let's just jump into our bool scroll. And bool scroll looks quite interesting when there's a lot of non-Boolean modifiers in your stack. Of course, we can just scroll through it and just find whatever Booleans we want. We could press A in order to add them to visibility, just like we could by clicking these A and R buttons over here. But the most interesting thing is that the apply to behavior that I discussed previously also applies here. If we were to try to apply this Boolean, because we didn't apply all the modifiers leading up to it, it's just not going to work out. However, if you shift click the check, it will apply all of the modifiers leading up to it, including that modifier. And this is something that I've wanted forever. And just now that it's part of everything, it's just great. I hope that users make their way with this and, find uses of it just as I do. But, and the best part is, even though I applied these, I could continue just applying stuff. And none of this is permanent. I can just right click cancel and none of that happened. And I can just go back into bool scroll again. And let's try it again. We actually want to apply all the Booleans, say, to here. So we'll just shift click and then click to apply. And now if we select this object and shift click Everscroll, these are the modifiers that are present that are remaining for this. So if you need to apply up to a certain point, you have everything in your power in order to do so. If you want to see something really interesting with this new modifier scroll and what it can do, is we will just shift click to go into our modifier scroll, and let's just apply everything up to the bevel. So let's just shift click with the arrow right above, and then we'll just click to apply. And let's just alt click sharpen or put away normal, and we're going to just move this over. And we already have an empty in the center, so let's just use that. So we're just going to shift click, select both of them, and press Alt X, and using modifier, we're just going to mirror this on the other side of this object. In fact, let's change this empty over to being a sphere, and let's right click it to make its draw size bigger. And if we move the empty, of course, we're adjusting the mirror of this object. And let's make it even more interesting. Let's go in and use dice, and we're just going to dice it vertically. And we'll use the method of knife, even though it may not work out for us, but let's try it. And here we are looking at our diced object. And let's just select everything in edit mode, press A to deselect all, and we'll just select this area, press Q, and under add modifier, we're just going to place a lattice. And I know what you're thinking, what the heck is he doing? So we're just going to add a couple of spans and grab this and just move it out. And here we are just latticing a box into something a little more random. Of course, there's limitations on the randomness because we didn't dice it the other axis, so we're a little limited. But here we are using a lattice and a mirror to create this object. And in case you forgot what we just did to this, let's press Q, and we can just go through modifier scroll, and you can see that, there's a bevel, and then there's a mirror, and then there's a lattice, and then there's a way to normal. And the interesting thing about modifier scroll in the expanded state is if there's an object there that needs to be brought back, you can actually just shift click and it will bring back the object associated with that modifier. And this was something that I personally requested, and I'm very happy to say is part of the new modifier scroll. And there's actually no other way to bring it back in hops other than this. I mean, you could Alt H and bring back these objects, but using this actually makes things just a little bit easier for you if you're working with multiple objects and modifiers and lattices and deformation objects that you need to grab that are actually contained within the modifier data object parameter itself. So just know that systems have been made to search and locate these things and bring them to the forefront for you. Let's go ahead and just right click cancel, and I'm just going to press undo and just hold undo down until it just stops undoing. And let's see how far we were able to undo, and we weren't able to undo very far. So that means let's just delete this box, bring in another box, and we'll Alt W, jump into box cutter, and it looks like we're in Ngon now, so you know what, I can work with that. We'll just switch over to line box in order to make a line that matches what our Ngon gave us, and begin drawing some additional cuts along this as well, just cutting out what we have here. And we want to actually bring back that scroll. So one of the first things I want to show is that when you jump into Boolean, the first Boolean that comes up is your last cutter. And this is something related to a request on the board that I had for a long time called last cutter, where basically you would normally have to roll the wheel back once in order to get your last cutter, but now we've made it where you would get your last cutter off the bat, and then if you begin rolling, you can begin progressing through your other cutters, of course. But that last cutter is always normally the one that you want, or at least that's our assumption. Then of course you can click to receive that cutter, and I can move it around because I saw it get a little bit wonky with the bevel in this area, so I just wanted to get that under control. But the thing that I wanted to talk about for this one is that if we were to press Q and go inside our scroll, we see that there's these icons on the side, and I just want to talk about what they mean in each section. So for Booleans, there are no icons for the modifiers that aren't related to Booleans because, of course, this is Boolean scroll. Your objective is literally to scroll through the Booleans. But this one turns the Boolean off and on, just like toggling the modifier off and on. This one will apply the modifier, and this one will append the Boolean to visibility. So in the event that you want to reveal several Booleans at once in a more interactive way, you could just press A in order to add it or remove it from visibility, or you can just scroll through and actually find the Boolean and just click on the A and turn it to an R and have that appended to your visibility set, so whenever you click to apply, you have all these Booleans added, or the bool shapes re-added, that you can then go in and begin making manual changes on. For example, let's say I wanted to just bring this shape back and just round that bevel at the bottom out. I could just bring it back and very easily do that without any further difficulty. So continuing on, if we look at this and we tap over to modifiers, we see that these icons are in a slightly different order, and that is also because they do different things. These two still do the same thing. This will toggle the modifier off and on. This one will now talk about the render visibility of an object. So in some cases, if you are bypassing the render visibility in order to bypass sort, for example, that's what we're doing with this particular mirror here. We have the mirror sort turned off. It's now something that you can visually see whenever you're working and be able to disable, either using sync, or you can go in here and actually just turn that R off. But what this means is that whenever we perform another cut, this mirror will be sorted all the way to the end of the stack because that's how sort works. The way around it though would probably be to add a second mirror on top and then turn the render visibility off, knowing that sort will only deal with the last mirror in the stack. But because there's only one mirror, that's the reason that a hops box actually has the mirror toggle with render visibility off, and that's the reason that we have these R's in the modifier panel to let you know if anything is bypassing render visibility. So just to show render visibility bypassing sort in action, just while I have you here, let's just right click cancel, and we scroll down and we see mirror and we have no render visibility on it. And what this means is that if I were to perform a cut, mirror will just stay put. And mirror is actually very integral because it's very early in the stack. It's spin or screw, mirror, then decimate. So it's pretty integral to it. If we were to just disable it, we probably are going to live, it appears. So let's actually turn on render visibility and just begin adding another cut. We see that because the modifier got moved, the whole form of the shape changed, which changed basically everything about how this shape worked. So when it comes to working with multiple mirrors in a stack, I always find it easier to just press Alt X, press A to add a new mirror, and just work that way. And so now we have both mirrors in the stack. The first mirror won't have to be disturbed, and we can just continue working without having to deal with any problems there. But just in case you ever wondered why you have an R that's disabled, that means that your render visibility is off and you're bypassing sort, which means if you press F12, you won't get the same result that you're looking at, which is why we made sync. But just letting you know that that is here for you whenever you're using mod scroll. And then of course the checkboxes are exactly the same as in bull scroll. Clicking them will just apply to modifier, and shift clicking them will apply them to a particular region. For example, if I want to apply all the constructive booleans that create, or all the constructive modifiers that basically make up this shape, I would apply everything to the weld, and we can see that it says 9 modifiers were applied. And so now all we have left are the booleans cutting into the cube. So we're dealing with something a little bit more sane. But as always, whenever you're doing these sort of things, you can always just right click and cancel. As with all our modals that are utilized in the base control system, shift scroll to move modifiers up and down the stack is also still in play. So if we press Q and we go into Everscroll, we can of course choose a Boolean in the stack by scrolling to it, and by shift scrolling we can move it up and down the stack. Of course, moving it too far up and down the stack is going to lead to catastrophic issues because we're interfering with the very construction of the shape itself. But in the event that you're wanting to resort your Booleans in the stack, you can do that on the fly just by holding shift and actually scrolling up and down in order to move a Boolean. When it comes to modifiers, you can also do the same thing, but on a greater level. We can hold shift and scroll and move a modifier up and down the stack if we want. We could scroll to progress it and just experiment with different modifiers not being present. For example, we'll stop at this point with the first bevel and just go over here and just toggle the decimate off just to see what our results would have been. We can't see it very good, so let's just click on the W to toggle the wire display, and let's see what would have happened without the decimate being present. Try it again. And for some reason I just am not seeing the wire. Let's press Z. Okay, Z is toggle wire display. W is actually toggle wire fade. My apologies. So here we can see what it would be like if we were going through our stack and we had never had certain modifiers present. So here it is if we didn't have decimate present, but we continued on with our weld and then our solidify and then tried to bevel such a thing. We see that without decimate to clean things up, that just wouldn't be possible. And we can even move our weld around the stack just by shift scrolling. So I'm just letting you know that the same functionality of the previous scrolls and what you've become used to in our modifier systems is still there. So you'll still be able to move modifiers up and down the stacks as you want. And then of course, right click to cancel if you're not trying to do any of that. So children's scroll is very new to this version of HardOps. So to just show it in action, let's just Shift A, add a plane. And we'll place a plane below the object and select this one. Just press Control P and we'll just make that a parent object, which means that when we rotate this object rotates as well. And we could Shift A, add another object like a cube and select both of them and just parent the object. Let's Shift A, let's add something that isn't a cube like a text object. Select both of them, Control P. Let's also parent a speaker, let's be weird with it. So Control P, object. And so we select our object, and if we move it, we see that of course there's an empty or a mirror object in here controlling the mirror that we're doing. But also we have all these objects as children, which is why they're moving along with it. So if we hover over our Everscroll tooltip, we see that control clicking will bring up children scroll. And we see that as we scroll through, we can actually select each of these objects in our scroll, except for some reason that cube. Actually, the cube's at the top, so my mistake. It looks like it might be alphabetical, but we see that we're able to scroll through all of the objects in our collection and select them. So in the event that you're dealing with a hierarchy situation, like you're building a character or an environment, you may be dealing with parenting and want to just select your children in a very quick and organic fashion. In fact, we can just append these to the visibility, and then when we click, they're left on screen. And to show that in action, let's actually hide the children. So we rotate it, we see that nothing's happening because we can't see anything. So if we go in and we actually click on these, we see that we're actually bringing them back, and we can append them to visibility. We can do the same thing with the plane, with the cube, bring them all back, and then when we click, we have all of our children being displayed on screen just on the fly. So collection scrolling or children scrolling is still very new. We still plan on a couple more scrolls to be added to this to make it truly complete and justify the reason that we expanded into the Everscroll trilogy. But I do hope that users are able to get the most out of this and find a reason to get in and get scrolling. But for the most part, these tools were made to be a troubleshooter source to allow users to kind of roll through their stacks and diagnose what problems could occur and at what point failure strikes, and see it visually on screen as a way of diagnostics in front of them for them to get in and deal with it. We're looking at an object at this point. Why is our shading looking bad? Well, it's because we don't have the weighted normal on top. So with one scroll, we bring that back. We could right click and just go back to where we were. And then of course, there's also the apply capabilities in it as well that cannot be overstated. Definitely get in there and just apply modifiers up to the levels that you want. More than likely Blender is going to be adding something for it down the road, but it's always one of those things I've wanted to do, and we've created so many different modifier apply solutions for it, and this one is definitely going to be one of my favorites. Just being able to get in and just shift click to apply to a range and then click and just be done with it and have all of our modifiers applied and cleaned up.